Hi, ladies and gentlemen, we are recording and broadcasting. The floor is yours.
Well, welcome everyone to the March meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I'd like to welcome you all here and call the meeting to order. And as you all know, due to public health and safety, due to COVID, we're running this meeting virtually. And I think this makes our second completed year of having virtual meetings. And hopefully we'll break that trend in our April face-to-face meeting. As always, we'll take written comments and questions. You can email them to the DISB at deltacouncil.ca.gov. We'll also take oral comments and questions. You can either use the raise hand function in Zoom or send an email to DISB at deltacouncil.ca.gov. And once you're recognized, you can introduce yourself and make your public comment. We'll first do a roll call and see if anyone has any additional things to report. Steve Brandt, nothing new. Virginia?
Virginia Dale, nothing new.
Joe?
Nothing new. No new declaration.
Tom, I think Tom Holzer will be joining us a little late today. Tanya?
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Jay?
Jay Lund, I have one new declaration. I was recently appointed to be the UC Davis member of the Blue Ribbon Committee for the Rehabilitation of Clear Lake, which does drain into the Sacramento Valley and eventually into the Delta. But it hasn't met yet. It's supposed to meet tomorrow. So I'm also going to miss a couple of hours of our meeting tomorrow.
Okay, Diane?
I have no new declarations and I apologize. I'll be leaving to go to class in an hour, but I'll come back.
Okay, Bob?
Bob Nyman, nothing new.
Lisa?
Lisa Wanger, nothing new.
All right, well,
Steve?
yes. Oh, Tom, welcome.
Yeah, I'll be here, but I'll probably have to run out in about an hour. Nada here.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Well, today's agenda will be, this is the beginning of a day-and-a-half meeting, and for the agenda this afternoon, we'll be getting reports from the Delta Stewardship Council and the Delta Science Program, and then largely we'll be discussing some of the recommendations and perhaps a way forward regarding the Delta Program assessment of the DISB. Tomorrow, we will have a series of presentations all day long from a number of folks who will help us better orient the board on potential review topics and on science and management in general and regulations in the Delta. So I'll move on to item number 2, which is my report, the chair's report. I want to point out that we have received a copy of public comment in your following correspondence in your packet. It's from the California Water Research, and it's a paragraph introducing the bill that's on the table to mandate the Delta Stewardship Council to do annual water supply reliability estimation for Delta flows. It's an information item. The main thing on my agenda is to introduce our 2 new postdocs, and it's Christine and Lillian. And Christine started on March 1st, and Lillian is here gratis because she starts on April 1st. And what I'd like to do is spend a little time and ask them to give a 5 to 10 minute introduction of themselves, preliminary introduction, that sometime later we'll hear a little bit more expanded version of their research interests and activities. So we'll start out with Christine, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the chance to introduce myself to those of you that haven't met yet. My name is Christine Grace Kabugao, and I have a background in plant microbial ecology and soil biogeochemistry. And so a lot of that actually came out of research that I was doing next to the Delta. So somehow I managed to go the opposite direction and go straight into the mountains in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where I did a management project with a crew that was looking at how different management options for forest plots affected fire intensity and severity. And so that was really fundamental to my conception of scientists as people who can work at that interface between, you know, ecology and the environment, and then also management and policy. So that was my impetus to start looking at positions that would at least merge those two parts. And that led me to doing a graduate program with the Bredesen Center for Interdisciplinary Education and Graduate Research over at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So while there, I was able to continue looking at some of these below ground processes that have these impacts on terrestrial atmospheric feedbacks, but also get a chance to learn how to write policy briefs, learn a little bit more about energy policy, and kind of dig into some of these policy related courses or topics that I don't think I would have had a chance to necessarily had I taken a more disciplinary graduate approach. So I was very excited about that. And my dissertation was focused heavily on looking at root functional traits and their impact on nutrient acquisition with relative to different soil conditions in tropical forests. So very different ecosystem than the Delta, but that makes it all the more exciting. So a lot of that project involved working with modelers to try to find these key ecological questions or key model needs that overlap in some way, because tropical forests tend to be a major uncertainty in these large ecosystem models that try to predict the pace of climate change. So on the ecological side, it's a very big deal to try to figure out whether or not these tropical forests are going to remain carbon sinks going forward as the climate changes. But that process, especially the below ground piece of it, how roots respond to nutrients, how roots are able to deal with phosphorus limitation that's present in so many of the tropical regions of the world, that part is not well understood or well modeled. So we did a lot of work to design experiments where at the end of the day, the data sets would be both able to answer those questions and also improve the models for DOE. So after that, I kind of started looking at more the microbial side of things, which are definitely not in models at all. But it is interesting to think about how these very small microbial communities are impacting organic matter transformations, and how to kind of think of that in terms of how do we scale that process and represent it accurately so that we're looking at how organic matter moves across the entire ecosystem. So that was part of the work that I was doing at my previous postdoc, which just ended, I think it's maybe 2 months ago now, so, at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. So now I'm kind of turning my focus to, once again, looking at how I can use that background to inform natural resource management, which is something new for me, but something that has always been kind of on the surface of what I was wanting to do. And that's something I'm really excited about for this new position and this work with all of you. So I'm happy to answer any questions either now or in chat, but otherwise I'm happy to yield the stage to Lillian.
Thank you, Christine. Any questions? Okay, Lillian, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to meet you all. Everybody I haven't met yet, a little bit early. So as Stephen said, my official position will start on April 1st. I'm currently finishing up a postdoc right now, so I'm just trying to eke out the last little bit of science before I move on to the next thing. My name is Lillian McCormick. I originally grew up on the East Coast, but now I'm a postdoc at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And so my kind of science story started when I went to undergraduate at Eckerd College in St. Pete, Florida. And there I was really focused on looking at how animals interact with their environment. And so I conducted a research thesis for my senior project and fell in love with conducting research and science. After undergraduate, or actually I should say during undergraduate, I was lucky enough to receive a NOAA Holling Scholarship, which essentially allowed me to go do an internship with a NOAA office. So coincidentally, I chose the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center, which is here in La Jolla. So my journey to California started a little bit early, and there I started getting exposed to science and the interaction between science and policy. And so I was working with scientists both at Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the Southwest Fisheries Science Center, and looking at large-scale shark movements in relation to environmental conditions, and was able to be a part of some field science and some research cruises there that really started getting me aware of the science that NOAA conducts and the policy that that science is used for. And then so after my undergraduate, I moved to the University of Delaware, where I was a research technician. And I spent 2 years as a research technician there, working with Jonathan Cohen at the University of Delaware. And there I was really fortunate to start exploring how anthropogenic influences marine organisms. And so, as I said, I did my undergrad in Florida. In 2012, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill happened, and that was a really large impact on the coastal ecosystems in the Gulf of Mexico. So much of the work that I did at the University of Delaware was actually centered in the Gulf of Mexico and involved several research cruises where I explored the science of how zooplankton, so small animals in the marine environment, were affected by this, not only the oil spill and the crude oil that had kind of moved into the marine environment, but also the Corexit dispersants that they started using to kind of mitigate some of the oil spill. And so that kind of opened my eyes to the fact of anthropogenic influence on the marine environment. And I decided to explore that fully at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where I completed my PhD in biological oceanography. And so I conducted my dissertation on examining the effects of ocean deoxygenation and coastal hypoxia on marine organisms. And I specifically focused on some more sublethal effects of deoxygenation on marine animals. And I decided to study this through animals' visual systems. So I kind of picked one unique physiological aspect of marine animals' lives that are fairly important to their survival, and essentially tested how low oxygen would affect visual physiology, visual behavior, and also metabolic physiology. And so this was kind of a new topic. People have known about how low oxygen affects vision in terrestrial animals for quite some time. For example, it can be involved in many human diseases. And also if high altitude flying pilots don't supplement their cabin with oxygen, they can experience visual impairment. However, despite the fact that marine organisms had experienced this wide range of oxygen conditions, this had never really been examined in the marine environment. And so I used my dissertation to explore that. And so, however, when I was also here at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, I became really exposed to how scientists interact with policymakers. And most of my experience was on an international level. And so I was fortunate enough to be a delegate for Scripps and other UC Regents schools, and attended one of the council the Conference of Parties meetings, the International Climate Conventions in Spain in 2018. And so that was a really unique experience where I was able to interact with international policymakers and delegates from countries all around the world, and essentially learn what science was important to these international policymakers and how scientists can kind of alter their science to make it adaptable for management purposes. In addition, much of my dissertation was a collaborative effect with the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center. So I did return there after a couple of years. and was able to interact with policy on a more local level in the state of California and national policy here in the United States. So all of that led me to pursue another position that would really, kind of as Christine expressed, that would really combine this science with the policy and essentially learn different science priorities in the state of California. And so that led me to the Delta Independent Science Board. And I'm really, really excited to start working with you all and start learning about policy in this region and in estuaries. And I'm very, very excited to be here. So thank you very much.
Well, welcome. Any questions from board members? I'm sure there'll be. Oh, Joe, go ahead.
Yes, from both of you, what are you planning to do with the science program? Any specific things you have proposed and will be pursuing?
So I know that I did have an initial meeting with Steve and Lisa about potentially helping with the subsidence review in particular, because that one has a hard commitment already, but we haven't yet had a discussion about what different publications might look like. Although I know for one, I'm really interested in looking a little bit more at the human dimension, since that's the type of research that I haven't gotten a chance to do before. And that's potentially something that I'd love to learn while I'm here.
Well, let me welcome again, and let me explain a little bit more about these two positions. The two postdocs are actually California Sea Grant postdoctoral scholars, and they are their official supervisor is actually the California Sea Grant director, Shauna Oh, but they will be reporting directly to the Delta Independent Science Board and particularly be mentored by either the board chair, myself, or the board leadership with the chair, which now Lisa and Jay. The appointments are for 1 year with the renewal for possibility of a renewal for a second year. These are positions we've never had before. They're not really, in a sense, working for the program. They're actually working for the board members as mentors, so in that case, they are new and different. We don't intend them to replace anything that current program staff are doing. We expect that they will be doing something new and different. And what that is still kind of under development and actually open for board members to send us an email. Once you get to know these folks a little bit better, we're having them read up on backgrounds, look at reviews and so forth. And they are to be here in many respects to do added benefit for the board as postdoctoral scholars. We will be developing something called the individual development plan. And what that is, that's a standard thing for California Sea Grant postdoctoral scholars and for postdoctoral appointments in general, where we work with the candidate and the mentors, sit down and put together a work plan that in essence makes looks at what the intent of the actual responsibilities would be, but also makes sure that there are enough components to that work plan so that the postdoc's professional career development and aspirations can be followed through and grow and maintain, and they can reach their career goals. So that's sort of a thing that is should be set up probably within the first few months of the start of the appointment. But we're looking for ideas. We have some ideas already, and we expect them to be able to dive into some of the topics we're thinking about in terms of potential reviews and do things that we normally as board wouldn't have the time to do ourselves. But so it really is going to be tremendous benefit to us. I really want to thank the science program and the California Sea Grant for really helping us get to this point in these stages. There was a highly competitive field, and as you can see, we picked the top two candidates, and we really looking forward to working with them. I see Tom has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the observation that Christine's already joined in on the subsidence effort. We had a sort of a exploratory discussion that she participated in. So she's already contributed some ideas. So.
Okay, so if board members have thoughts or ideas, send them to the leadership team, and we'll start compiling we already have started compiling a list, and we'll begin to work more carefully with the new members. Okay, of the team. I think that's all I have. Edmund, is any other board members, comments, questions on my report in general?
There are no public comments.
No public comments. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3, which is the Delta Stewardship Council Chair Report being given by Ryan Stanbrock today. Ryan?
Good afternoon, Chair Brandt and members of the board. Thank you for allowing me to come before you and give a little bit of an update in terms of what the council has been up to. As Chair Brandt mentioned, I'm Ryan Stanbrock. I'm the council's Chief Deputy Executive Officer. I'll start with the council held its monthly meeting on February 24th, where staff presented its anticipated priorities for 2022. And at a high level, many of the items, particularly on the planning front, are a continuation of ongoing initiatives, really with an expectation that, at least with regards to a few major initiatives, we anticipate completing this year, which include the amendment to the ecosystem chapter of the Delta Plan, that is chapter 4, as well as completion of the rulemaking for the Delta Levee's investment strategy. Additional planning priorities for the year include further work on the adaptation strategy of Delta Adapts, updating the council's covered actions appeals procedures, and the completion of a draft environmental justice issue paper that will inform future council actions to better serve disadvantaged communities in pursuit of the council's mission. On the science front, the Delta Science Program has a full slate, as you might imagine, and amongst that is the program's planning to publish the next iteration of the Science Action Agenda, as well as the 2022 edition on the State of Bay Delta Science, and the launch of the Delta Science Tracker. This is a web-based tracking system that will serve as a clearinghouse of sorts for Delta Science activities and really strengthen the collaboration, which has kind of been a hallmark of the science program. 2022 will also see the science program welcome the next cohort of Delta Science Fellows. The science program is also planning 3 science symposia, which will focus on Delta governance, which I believe Delta governance is a 3-part series, the first of which I think occurred last week. The other 2 topics will be on salinity management and harmful algal blooms. And the 2 other items of note for the science program this year is a modeling summit that will look at the potential development of a virtual modeling collaboratory, and the launch of the Delta Residents Pilot Survey led by Dr. Jess Rudnick. Now, in addition, the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, or what we call DPIC, is scheduled to meet 3 times this year, the first of which is scheduled for later this month on the 28th. And the DPIC Restoration Subcommittee has actually kicked off its work, I believe, at the end of January, and is scheduled to meet at least a handful of times more throughout the year. And then one last note I would highlight for the board, and one that I am personally excited about, is the significant progress that we plan to make on our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work. This is a staff-led effort, which began really in earnest in 2020 with an aim to foster and to sustain really an equitable, inclusive, and diverse organizational environment and culture at the council. So really excited about that effort, and to sum up, really excited about all that the council has going on currently, and looking forward to a very, very productive and busy year. Moving on to the legislative front, just a few bills that I'd like to note for the board. Bill introduction deadline has now been, was about 2 weeks ago. And with that came a slew of new measures. And really two that I just point out for the board this afternoon. The first is SB 1218, which was introduced by Senator Melissa Hurtado, who represents the South Central Valley, including portions of Fresno and Bakersfield. SB 1218 would require the council, in consultation with relevant agencies and the public, to publish at least annually a water supply reliability estimation. And this is, now I'm going to read directly from the bill, for the water that flows into the Delta and out of the Carquinez Strait and into the Bay. Now that is the entirety of the bill. And so given that it was just introduced, I would anticipate that further discussion and development, not only with council staff and the author's office, but with other interested stakeholders, will occur going forward. And then really maybe just as an aside, but also would note that Senator Hurtado also introduced SB 1219. And this bill would dissolve the State Water Resources Control Board and establish a blue ribbon commission to develop a successor agency by 2025. Now, both bills are required to sit a minimum of 30 days before they can be heard in their first policy committees. And so given their introduction date, that would lead to an anticipated hearing probably around the 3rd or 4th week of March. And we'll certainly keep the board apprised of developments going forward on that front, on both fronts, as well as any other related legislation that may be of interest to the board. And then finally, I'll just conclude by noting a few changes on the council itself. As the board may be aware, this past Wednesday, Governor Newsom appointed Julie Lee to the council after serving as Undersecretary of the Government Operations Agency since 2018. And prior to that, Ms. Lee held several positions in the office of Governor Jerry Brown. Also, the governor reappointed Judge Frank Damerel to his 3rd term on the council, where he has served since 2014. And then finally, Council Chair Susan Tatayan, whose appointment term ended in February, announced her retirement last week from state service after more than 35 years in water resources related work. As many of you know, Susan had been with the council since 2014, serving as chair since 2019. And just speaking on behalf of staff, we wish her nothing but the best going forward. And with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thanks, Ryan, for that thorough report. Good to see you again. And of course, we also send our regards, and we have to Susan, and our best wishes for her and her retirement. I have one follow-up question on that. Is there going to be I don't know what the process is for selecting a new chair. Is there going to be a interim chair or something like that? Who's taking the reins for now?
Yeah, at this point, Vice Chair Virginia Modueno would, I believe, is slated to assume those kind of interim chair duties. Ultimately, the chair of the council requires a vote of the council members themselves. One has not been scheduled at this point, but I would anticipate that forthcoming in the near future.
Okay, thanks. Any board members have any questions for Ryan? Jay.
Thank you, Ryan. I too will be sorry to see Susan no longer grace these meetings. She's always been a fun and very insightful person to work with in the many years when I started working with her on one of the, I think it was the 1998 California Water Plan. So we will miss her. But hopefully she'll be around, still stays engaged.
Okay, the only other thing, Ryan, that I'm sure you're aware of this, but we are planning to attend your April, May, and June meetings and give presentations in April on our monitoring review, our final review, and in May on our water supply reliability review, and then in June, sort of our quote unquote annual report, which would scope out primarily what our intent is over the next year or so in terms of where we're going. And we're also been talking to Amanda about getting on the agenda for not this March meeting, but the next meeting of DPIC. And in that case, probably be focusing primarily on our monitoring review results and give that formally to them as well.
Very good. Looking forward to certainly having the board members with us at the upcoming meetings, as well as I'm sure Amanda is at DPIC. So glad to hear that.
Any other questions? Laurel, did you have something, or are you just jumping it, waiting for your next?
I just wanted to find the
Okay.
button before the heat was on.
Okay, Edmund, any public comment?
Yes, we have a public comment from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have permission to unmute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation if applicable. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Deirdre Desjardins with Reporting Water Research. And I just noticed with respect to the Delta Independent Science Board's participation in the science action agenda, that there was some sort of confusing communications and attending both the Delta Independent Science Board meetings and the Delta Stewardship Council meetings. There really could be better direct communication between the board and the council. So I'm going to pull a transcript, and I apologize, I haven't had a chance to do that, of the communications, just and send them to the full council and to the ISB in the interest that people identify where there just could be more and better bandwidth. And I think it's really critically important in issues like the science action agenda. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Deirdre. Look forward to seeing that. Anything else, Edmund?
There are no additional public comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll move on to item number 4, which is Delta Lead Scientist Report. Laurel?
Thank you, Steve. And I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen because I have a few items to share with you all today. And hopefully you can see that now. Let me go ahead and just, oh wait, I didn't have to hit share. Okay. Hopefully now you can see my slides. Can I just see some nodding heads? Okay, great. Well, I know that many of you are aware of the details of our search for replacement ISB members for the upcoming vacancies at the end of 2022, as well as the current vacancy available as a result of Jim Klern's departure. Our committee reviewed 10 applications for these 3 positions and completed our interviews in mid-February. And we will be recommending 3 candidates to the council at their March 24th meeting for the council members' approval for appointment to the Independent Science Board. So I am thrilled to provide a preliminary introduction of the 3 people that we will be recommending. The first, who we would be pursuing the June 1st, 2022 appointment for, is Dr. Jay Obisekera, who is currently director of the Sea Level Solutions Center at Florida International University, and he's also professor at Florida International University. He spent several decades of his career as a state scientist with the South Florida Water Management District and has worked on restoration of the Kissimmee River, restoration of the Everglades, and water operations for Lake Okeechobee, where he has encountered a suite of objectives for management that are quite similar to those that we face here in the Delta. His expertise lies in water resource systems. He has an engineering background and emphasizes modeling and implications of climate change in his work. He's also done some modeling of water quality. The second person that we will be recommending to the council is Dr. Anna Michalak, who is currently director at the Department of Global Ecology at the Carnegie Institution for Science at Stanford. And her expertise really lies in two areas. One is understanding the impacts of climate change on inland and coastal water quality, including harmful algal blooms and nutrient mobilization. And then the second area of expertise is really getting into the nitty-gritty understanding of land-atmosphere interactions and how they influence climate change. She has been director of several international boards and participated in many review panels as well. And then the third person we're recommending is Dr. Inga Werner, who recently retired from the Swiss Center for Applied Ecotoxicology, which is part of IAVOG, where she was the director. Prior to that, she spent about 15 years at UC Davis, where she also directed a center for ecotoxicology associated with the vet school. So her area of expertise is really aquatic toxicology and has conducted a number of risk assessments in aquatic and terrestrial environments. She's done a lot of work at the intersection of agriculture and water quality and has worked with a lot of agricultural stakeholder communities in her work. All three candidates do bring extensive board experience and interdisciplinary experience. They're just fantastic people, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do on the board pending approval by the council. So stay tuned to the March 24th council meeting for those approvals. There were a couple of items that I wanted to bring to your attention because these are things that we're working on in the science program that we're quite open to discussion on and input from the Independent Science Board on. So there's two workshops that I really want to spend my time today profiling and would welcome discussion in the Q&A. One is a series of salinity management workshops that the Delta Science program is leading, but includes a planning committee that consists of representatives from many different regulatory agencies and other stakeholder communities. What we are recognizing in this series of salinity management workshops is that salinity is the most challenging aspect of the Delta to manage during drought conditions. And the way that we have been addressing management of salinity during drought is conducted very much in response, Cody, very much in response to drought emergencies. So there have been numerous calls through the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee and other multi-agency groups for doing forward-thinking planning. And this is also very much in line with the ISB's former recommendations. But to do forward-looking collaborative planning that considers a range of scenarios for management and also provides a more thorough assessment of trade-offs in a multivariate sense. So what will the impacts be on human communities and economics, as well as what will the impacts be on ecosystems and our ability to provide a reliable water supply. So this is the challenge that we're hoping to at least take some initial steps in tackling through this series of workshops. And our long-term goal, in fact, is to catalyze a collaborative adaptive management approach to controlling salinity intrusion in the face of severe and sustained drought and sea level rise. So we will be considering these climate change scenarios as part of the longer term process. So in order, I think it's useful to start with that long-term vision before talking about what the immediate goals of this year's workshops are going to be, because we're not going to get there all at once. And in fact, this process that we're calling for is going to be one that engages many different parties and probably takes place over an extended period of time. We're hoping to kick off this process through 2 workshops with some focus groups in between. And in the first workshop, which is right around the corner next month, April 26th through 27th, we would be sharing this vision, but also framing the challenge of future salinity management in the context of climate change, environmental justice, with awareness of what the current laws and regulations are. We will build towards a shared understanding of how salinity management impacts different people, industries, and ecological systems. So we're reaching out to a wide range of groups to contribute their interest in this problem. And we're going to begin to identify knowledge gaps that could be filled with future research and scenario-based modeling. What we're hoping to do between the first and the second workshop is to conduct a pilot modeling experiment that evaluates alternative salinity management strategies, perhaps for a more restricted region of the Delta. And the example I like to provide is the example of Frank's Tract. Frank's Tract is the area that is immediately affected by the hard rock salinity barrier across the False River that was installed in 2015 and then again in 2021. But that is one strategy for managing salinity in the Frank's Tract. And in fact, an alternative strategy has emerged through a collective visioning process that took place during, largely during 2019 and 2020 during the pandemic, to use nature-based solutions. So strategic restoration in order to decrease salinity values within the Frank's Tract. And so examination of these 2 alternative scenarios under climate change and sea level rise conditions might be an example of the type of pilot modeling exercise that we would hope to run between these 2 workshops. The focus groups that will take place over the summer will engage potentially interested parties in helping us to design this modeling exercise. And then in the final workshop in October, we would be using the results of this modeling exercise as a way to catalyze meaningful discussion about how we might evaluate alternative strategies in this longer term process. I think it's really going to crystallize thinking about what the gaps are. You know, it might highlight areas where different parties might be willing to accept compromise in future planning. But it's going to provide for some very focused discussion around trade-offs. And it's also going to give us a concrete example that we could then bring to the DPIC as something that we could leverage in getting their support for engaging in this longer term, more comprehensive scenario planning process. So we're really excited about this series of workshops. We're talking about it in as many venues as we can, and we're eager to seek feedback. The second workshop, which I think is synergistic with the scenario or with the salinity management workshop in some respects, is an integrated modeling summit. And I've alluded to this in previous ISB meetings as being a workshop in which we are hoping to take the next steps towards the development of a collaboratory. We anticipate that the timing of this workshop would be August 2022. And the goal of this workshop would really be to discuss the vision for and identify next steps towards the development of a virtual modeling collaboratory for the Delta. And just some background here, in 2020, the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee held a workshop and concluded with strong agreement that a virtual collaboratory would be helpful in advancing our integrated modeling community. But despite unanimous agreement on the need for this platform, ideas of what it would consist of varied strongly among participants. I could talk a little bit about my own vision for this collaboratory, which I think will be refined through this workshop. But in my mind, The collaboratory is a virtual space that promotes the sharing of models and associated resources that might include instructional materials. It might include a community of users that could help new users adopt the model. And it would also facilitate the integration of data with these models. And in an advanced version, it might provide a front end for actually linking models so that, for example, a flow model could feed directly into a water quality model, which could feed directly into a habitat model. So there's various degrees to which those models could be linked. And I would hope that this would provide some infrastructure and technical support in doing so. It's also my dream to eventually seek funding for a center associated with this collaboratory that would include human resources as well, including resident expertise in stakeholder engagement in the modeling process. It could provide funds for working groups to tackle challenges such as this salinity management challenge that I just talked about. And I think ideally, given enough funding, it would also include IT support, scientific IT support for doing syntheses and large data analysis projects. But for this particular workshop, the format will be, we're still in the planning phase, but it's looking likely that we will seek involvement from people at places like CSDMS, the Community Surface Dynamics Modeling System at the University of Colorado, which if Diane is still here, I know she's very familiar with. There have been similar modeling communities set up in the Everglades and the Chesapeake Bay, and we would be looking to bring in people who help develop those communities to share lessons learned and engage in discussion with us. We would also hold panels and breakout groups to identify some pilot projects that would benefit from the collaboratory. This could be projects that we could reference in seeking external funding to support the collaboratory. And also we're hoping to establish partnerships as part of this workshop. The outcomes of the workshop are anticipated to be, first of all, a refined plan to initiate development of the collaboratory, so at least the low-hanging fruit components of that collaboratory based on current resource availability, but then also to develop a concrete plan for writing a proposal to pursue additional external funding. There have been several calls recently through NOAA for modeling centers that could be applicable here. I'd welcome suggestions that you all might have encountered that might be relevant here. And I am cognizant that this center may need to have a home external to the Delta Science program, and that's fine. But we anticipate that the science program would be a partner in this. And then I want to make sure we have time for discussion, but I will be enclosing in the post-meeting materials to all of you some relevant papers, and I'll just hit the highlights really quick. I'm not going to go into any details, but things that have come out recently that might be relevant to your ongoing planning. And there's a series of papers that Sam Bashevkin has just recently come out with that is relevant to the environmental flows planning that's underway, that look at temperature trends in the Delta, as well as how temperature relates to flow in a correlative sense. In a lot of the discussions that I've been engaged in, temperature keeps rising in importance. So to what extent can we actually control temperatures in the Delta? As many of you have heard, many of our fish species that we manage for are at critical thresholds for temperature that affect mortality, but also have a number of sublethal effects that could impact these fish populations. And so these are things that I think would be great for you to be aware of. I also wanted to point out that Annika Keeley, who is formerly with the science program, recently came out with a paper in bioscience that is a product of the connectivity symposium that the Delta Science Program held at UC Davis in February of 2020, just before things shut down. This may also be relevant, perhaps in a peripheral sense, to the environmental flows work. And then for the council, I've recently just gone through a series of profiling work that our Delta Science Fellows from 2018 have recently come out with. A number of them are related to understanding stressors on fish communities. And I'll highlight that Levi Lewis's work in particular was testing some assumptions that are relevant to the North Delta flow actions. And basically finding that that those assumptions are supported in fish otolith data. So this could also potentially be relevant to some of the environmental flows work. The next set of papers that I profile are relevant to subsidence reversal and carbon sequestration. Tyler Anthony and Michael Bogard were both looking at greenhouse gas fluxes. Tyler was looking at agricultural lands that are drained for most of the year but undergo winter flooding, and how those practices might impact greenhouse gas emissions, which is related to subsidence. And then Matthew Bogard was looking at wetlands. He had an eye towards wetlands designed for carbon sequestration, but one of the uncertain terms has been how much carbon that is sequestered in plant material is exported laterally from those wetlands. And then the final paper that I'll attach from our fellows is a paper that is relevant to an open question on the role of predation within the Delta. And this paper was looking at how habitat and structure along Delta channels impacts the behavior of Chinook salmon in the presence of predators. So with that, I would open the floor to questions and comments, and just say that I hope that with respect to these two workshops, this is the start of a longer conversation between us.
Thanks, Laurel. A lot of information there. Anyone have any questions, Jay?
Thank you, Laurel, for some really interesting ideas and work. On the Delta salinity workshops, there'll be a temptation to do the modeling mostly around the Franks Tract and sort of San Joaquin side area. I guess I would recommend that you think about doing it in more than one location, so as to take the heat off of any one location, and to help people think about it as a more general concept and not as we're trying to victimize one particular location.
That's great advice. I am in the process of trying to convene a modeling subcommittee, and unfortunately our first meeting isn't going to be until April 1st. But I just throw out that Franks Tract example because it's an easy one that comes to mind for me. But we haven't done any concrete planning yet, and I really appreciate that suggestion.
Yeah. So I suggest you pick two and maybe even three. I mean, it will be interesting to look at sort of the San Joaquin side, a little bit separate from the Sacramento side, which would let you be able to get at some of the sloughs off the Sacramento where some people are worried about, and people have often proposed to put barriers. And then I think maybe a third case might be also quite interesting, because there is some interaction between what you do on the San Joaquin side and what happens on the Sacramento side, and vice versa. So it might be interesting to have sort of a third study that focuses on how these two nominal basins do interact, and on the occasions, particularly during droughts, when it might be important.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, hi, Laurel. Thanks. That really was a lot of very ambitious and great stuff that you have planned. I could ask a million questions, but I'm going to just focus on the collaboratory. Just bringing to you some of the experiences in the Chesapeake Bay. You did mention that we have a community modeling, and I will say that you said you had a lot of different visions, and these are the kind of efforts that can get really bogged down in process and not make good progress, and people get frustrated. So just speaking from several experiences, I'm not talking about the Bay program specifically, but something that I think really jump-started the Bay community was focusing on a very specific problem there was a concern that we weren't adequately representing climate change in the main management model. And we took a multi-modeling approach. I say we broadly, I was barely involved, but many smart people worked on this multi-model approach and demonstrated that there really was a problem in terms of the model having enough flexibility to fully represent climate change. And that kind of early win really helped engage people in the community of practice. So I would say rather than trying to do a little bit of everything at once, it's kind of good to get a low-hanging fruit early win. And then and my second comment is, you know, it is pretty common to go this route of, well, and then eventually once we have all the science developed, we're going to add the social science later. That's a pretty common perspective, but you know, something that we've learned through about model integration is that if you don't have social scientists engaged from the beginning, you don't end up with the endpoints they need. So had to get that in there. I'm sure you know that too.
I'm in full agreement. And that's why my dream is really to include some funding for human resources too, that can help modelers come together across disciplines at these really early stages. And I appreciate your comment on the importance of this early win too. At the outset of this process, I do see a lot of synergies between this and the salinity project. And I'm putting the person who's Ben Geske, who's planning the modeling workshop on the modeling subcommittee for the salinity management workshops. And I'm hoping that that can become like the project that people can rally around in helping to build this collaboratory. I really appreciate that comment. Virginia.
And I just wanted to bring up what you know again, but the old adage that some models are useful, some integrated models are useful. So thinking of the decisions to which they would contribute at the very beginning, and not all decisions, but as Lisa said, maybe focusing on a particular one and a component of that, rather than getting all the modeling details right, which could take forever.
Yeah, helpful comment. Thank you.
I just have a few comments. One, first of all, thanks for getting 3 excellent candidates for our new board members. I think you've done a terrific job, and we're looking forward to having them join us. And since Jay is going to be here, the new Jay at June 1st, we'll assign him with the taking the lead in the Delta Conveyance Review. Well before he arrives, we'll make that assignment. Secondly, on the climate, I think in a couple of cases, when you talked about climate, you said climate change and sea level rise. And is the focus of that going to be on sea level rise, or just are all components of climate change?
Are you talking about the salinity management workshops?
Yes.
The focus would be on sea level rise. That's what we're thinking. But we're in the process of inviting speakers right now. We are hoping to have a session that is focused on discussing what aspects of climate change and associated uncertainty should be included in this modeling process.
Okay, and finally on the integrated modeling collaboratory, of course, we highly recommend that you use the board's fish and flow review as one of the required readings, because in that we recommended an integrated modeling approach to link a 3D hydrodynamic water quality model to fish habitat. And truly, we think that helped inspire the creation of the integrated modeling team to begin with, but at least they say that inspired them. But I think that's, when you think about the modeling collaboratory, as you know, it also came out with Peter Goodwin recommending something along that line in terms of the science needs assessment. But when I think about it, I think about it could go in 1,000 different directions. So modeling with a purpose is usually maybe more valuable than just the modeling. And so maybe there's a way you can narrow down what the focus might be, or what the level of integration might be. And is it going to be from fish to flows, that level of integration, or is it going to be, weather to salinity levels, or there's a whole variety of those kind of things which could be making it very huge. And maybe there's an idea to pick 2 or 3 of those and see where the overlap is, and maybe that's just what's common themes in any one of those things that might move you forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment too. And Karen Kafetz was texting me because I ignored something that was totally obvious to me in my mind, and therefore I didn't say it. With respect to your climate change question, which is that we are really focused on severe and recurring drought as a driver of these challenging conditions for managing salinity. And I was just totally remiss in not saying that. With respect to your second comment, I appreciate that call for focusing. And in my mind, what I envision is getting a center funded. So there's a number of things we can do that are low-hanging fruit right now, like building this community of modeling users. I think that is approachable given the resources that we have. But in my ideal world, I would like to have funding pulled together for this center. And the way I am seeing it in my mind right now is that center would essentially sponsor working groups, maybe 2 at a time or so. It would all depend on funding availability to focus on specific problems. And I think that over time, this community and this infrastructural resource would grow in a way that is prioritized according to these projects. If that makes sense. But I think that that's very much in line with what you're saying here.
Okay, Joe.
Yeah, probably one thing I still remember is probably Steve remember too, that LCA, the Louisiana coastal area, at that time, Robert Twilly, he basically put together a large block diagram, which has components of everything almost in ecosystems and hydrodynamics. And that was proposed, and I don't know where it went, but you might want to check that it's Robert Twilly from LSU, but that is actually, he was working with the whole Louisiana coastal area enterprise.
I'll ask him for that. He's actually one of my collaborators, so I know him well.
All right, so you know much more than I do. So you might want to talk to him.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I didn't know about this block diagram. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts? Edmund, do we have public comment on this?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation if applicable. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just wanted to point out that a paper was just published where researchers, Christine Albano and other researchers at the Desert Research Institute looked at changes in evapotranspiration across the West. And they found a large and robust change across much of the Western US. The largest change was centered on the Rio Grande region, where ET0 increased by 135 to 235 millimeters. It increased in California by about 50 millimeters from 1980 to 2020. That's about 3.4 inches. So this is, I'm sorry, the 50 millimeters is less than 3.4 inches. It shows that the reduction in runoff that we're seeing is partly a permanent shift due to increased evapotranspiration. So we've got to take this into account. It's not just sea level rise. NOAA did come out with a report where they thought 1 foot of sea level rise is baked in by 2050, no matter what happens with greenhouse gas emissions. And there could be more. But some of it, the change is happening now, and how we respond to this is critically important. So the other issue is there is a low salinity zone in the delta that shifts upriver and downriver depending on outflow. And where that low salinity zone is critically important for estuarine fish, and particularly delta smelt, but also other fish. And so there is an issue that if we narrow the lens and only look at things like filling in Frank's tract, we're really not looking at ways in which we can ensure the survival of the pelagic fish. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Deidre.
And I'll
Go
just
ahead.
clarify that the modeling that we're talking about doing between these two workshops is a pilot exercise, and we would hope that the process that this would kick off, that's a longer term process, would be delta wide in its scale, and look at a range of impacts and trade-offs.
Okay, thanks, Laurel. We'll move on to our next item, which is item number 5, which is reflections from our California Sea Grant State Fellow. As I think all of you know, annually we have a California Sea Grant State Fellow assigned to us, and these folks have been absolutely critical to the operation of our board, and we never probably tell them how much we appreciate them. But our current fellow is Jennica Moffat, whose term expires at the end of March, and I can probably say with all honesty that I have had more emails from Jennica than probably anyone else on the board, maybe with the exception of Edmund, and she has worked tirelessly, I know, in helping us get through and complete the monitoring enterprise review, which is the largest review the board has ever done. And so at the end of the term, we asked them to give us a reflection on what they've learned and how, how this may have helped her in her career and where she's going. So Jennica, floor is yours.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully that all those emails were more helpful than pesky.
Nope, they were.
All right, good. Okay, hopefully that is the right view that you're seeing here. Thanks again, Steve, for that intro. Hello, for those who don't know, I'm Jennica Moffat. I have been the California Sea Grant State Fellow in the Adaptive Management Unit at the Delta Science Program for the past year. Started March 1st, 2021, and I'll be finishing up at the end of this month. And I'm excited to kind of share some of my reflections of what I have worked on and what I've learned over the past year as a fellow in the Delta Science Program supporting the ISB. So you all may remember that when I presented on my research background at the beginning of my fellowship, that I spoke about getting my start in science in the Delta as an undergraduate and research technician, and that I was excited to be back to working in the Delta in a new capacity of science policy. I was eager to explore this question of how I could use my background in the Delta to support effective management. And as I was putting this presentation together and reflecting on everything I have really crammed into the past 12 months, I've been incredibly grateful that I was able to hit the ground running, thanks in part due to my background. I felt that that has allowed me to really take advantage of this one-year fellowship. But of course, even with my familiarity with the Delta, I had a ton to learn, and I did learn a ton. I've grown professionally and learned even more than I expected, and I have to say that I had very high expectations for this year, and my experience blew those expectations out of the water. So as you all know, a unique perk of a fellowship with the Adaptive Management Unit of the Delta Science Program is the opportunity to work with the Independent Science Board. As staff support for the ISB, not only have I had the chance to meet and work closely with you all, but I have also learned a lot through supporting a public independent board. Working with the ISB has provided me with a lot of insight that I was looking for in this fellowship. From public engagement to using and communicating science for effective management to working collaboratively internally and externally. I grew a lot in my skills of meeting coordination and facilitation for various meetings, hence Steve's comment about my many pesky emails. I learned a lot about working collaboratively through supporting the development of large and complex reports with many authors. I also had the opportunity to work on these collaborative projects independently, which allowed me to grow my project management skills. I've helped to facilitate public meetings and stakeholder and community engagement. And of course, I was able to help support the use of science for management, which really was my primary goal for my fellowship. I really appreciated the opportunity to not only become very familiar with how the board works and the expectations of leadership and guidance, but I also felt like I was able to genuinely support important products to support effective management in the Delta. I've been grateful that I have been able to help with projects on either end of the spectrum from the very beginning by helping with scoping a food web review to helping wrap up a very large and complex report, which brings me to the monitoring enterprise review. Of course, a huge part of my fellowship has been supporting the monitoring enterprise review, or the MER. The MER was actually what drew me to this position during interviews for this fellowship. And right from the start, I was able to jump in and contribute. And as the MER is getting wrapped up this month, it has been a very satisfying full circle to start and finish my fellowship with the MER. And actually, I've been able to see my own growth through my work on this project. In addition to the collaborative work skills that I mentioned in the previous slide, helping to support the completion of the MER has provided me with a lot of opportunities to grow and learn. Of course, a primary part of that has been science synthesis, and this is some serious science synthesis since this is a large report and has many different components to it that have been integrated together. Right when I started, I got to help synthesize and integrate stakeholder input from questionnaires, seminars, and panels. I got to conduct, analyze, and summarize interviews with heads of various organizations, which was a fantastic opportunity to be in the virtual room with folks that I otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to. And this was also my first experience with qualitative data collection and analysis. I also helped to develop graphs and graphics for the final report, and I have been supporting with communication of the final report to the Collaborative Adaptive Management team, as well as for the IEP workshop in a couple weeks. In addition to these skills, working on the MER was an incredibly effective way to get immersed in some of the most pressing issues and hot topics around managing the wicked problem of the Delta. I got to dig into the input that the ISB received throughout the many components of this report, which was really enlightening to hear and read the various perspectives and see themes that emerged throughout. Working on this report for the past year has provided a sort of crash course in monitoring and management, which has been an invaluable experience. Throughout this year, working on the monitoring enterprise review and seeing firsthand the great interest in this report, I also became familiar with the weight and responsibility that the board has for providing sound scientific guidance for management in the Delta. Working on the MER has been a lot of very satisfying work, and I am grateful to help get it over the finish line. In addition to my ISB support role, I have also supported some other projects and efforts within the Delta Science program. One of those efforts was planning and hosting the Adapting Restoration for a Changing Climate Symposium just last month. Over a 10-month planning process, I got to work with my colleague Dylan Chappell in a fantastic planning committee made up of folks from agencies, nonprofits, and academia to scope and brainstorm to take this idea of a symposium and turn it into what felt like a very great two-day event. It was a great experience to work with a group of people with different experiences and priorities to build off of each other towards a shared goal and to develop something that was much better because of all these various perspectives. I learned how to make use of virtual tools like Mural, like the one you see here on the screen, and to take advantage of collaborating virtually. I learned all about the immense effort required to plan and host a symposium, and of course, got more coordination and facilitation experience. One of my other main projects has been supporting a synthesis on restoration in the Delta and Sassoon Marsh, which is led by Dylan Chappell. A restoration synthesis was identified by the ISB in your 2013 restoration review, where you recommended the development of a comprehensive map and database to show where habitat restoration activities are being conducted or planned in the Delta, accompanied by essential information on these projects. So this restoration synthesis is an effort to do just that. I have been supporting the synthesis through researching all restoration projects in the estuary and collecting metadata on them for a comprehensive database. I've been quantifying and summarizing restoration to date and planned, creating graphs to provide overall summaries of restoration efforts like the two you see on the left here. I got to exercise my ArcGIS skills and create this map of restoration projects that you see on the right. So this has been a great project to work on some technical skills in addition to getting familiar with restoration projects in the Delta and Sassoon Marsh, and again has allowed me to contribute to science for effective management. I also have had the opportunity to work on many other projects in between these primary projects. I have grown a lot, again, in my coordination and facilitation skills through supporting interagency groups and meetings. As I mentioned earlier, because of my support of the Monitoring Enterprise Review, I had the opportunity to support a monitoring assessment for the Collaborative Adaptive Management team. Because of my familiarity with the Monitoring Enterprise Review, I was invited to co-author this report with Louise Conrad. I helped to communicate the findings and recommendations of the Monitoring Enterprise Review and was given the unique opportunity to attend, present at, and participate in CAMP and CSAMP meetings. I've been helping with the Council's environmental justice issue paper in various ways, including reviewing public comments and helping take notes for interviews. I've helped with efforts led by my colleague Chelsea Batavia, including the Delta Governance Brown Bag webinar and Interweaving Traditional Knowledge and Western Science Initiative. I was able to fit in many different trainings throughout my year, from overviews of federal regulations to science communication to ADA accessibility training. I got to get out in the field a couple of times, which I especially appreciated as my fellowship hasn't been entirely work from home. And then finally, something pretty different from the rest of my work here, I worked with a fellow, Karen Gutierrez, to help Dr. Kristen Aquilino at the UC Davis Bodega Marine Lab to complete a story map telling the story of the critically endangered white abalone. So I got a little bit of marine work in there as well. So what is next? Well, in a few months, my partner and I will be packing up and moving all the way across the country to Baltimore. As two native Californians that have barely even visited the East Coast, I am equal parts excited and a little bit terrified, but I'm excited for the opportunity to take the skills that I have gained and knowledge of our local estuary to potentially work in an estuary on the opposite side of the country. And I'm hopeful that just like my start here with the Delta Science program, that I can hit the ground running in a new position 2,700 miles away. So as I mentioned at the top, I had very high expectations for this year, and those expectations were beyond met. I developed a multitude of skills such as coordination and facilitation, science communication, collaboration, project management. I learned firsthand the importance of effective and persistent communication, the benefit of being detail-oriented, open to change and new ideas, and staying organized. I gained an incredible amount of knowledge about using science for management and about the estuary as an integrated system, and the complex interacting social and ecological aspects that must be considered in its management. I'm incredibly grateful for the guidance and mentorship that I have received throughout this year and for the chance to genuinely contribute to important and meaningful projects and products. Right from the start, I have felt very appreciated by the board, which means a lot coming into a new and unfamiliar role. I'm very grateful to have received this position where I got to work so closely with the board, and I believe it really made my fellowship distinct and fulfilling and helped me to grow immensely in just a short amount of time. So thank you all so much, and thank you for providing time for me today to share these reflections, and I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Well, thanks again, Jennica. Yes, round of applause. You have done an absolute tremendous and excellent job for us throughout, and and you've accomplished so much for the board, particularly under trying conditions, because you were faced not only with the fact that everything was virtual and we couldn't meet face to face, but we were with any of your colleagues, but also having the challenges we faced over the last 12 months. And throughout that, you maintained a healthy, positive attitude. And I never said the word pesky emails. In fact, I would categorize them as extremely helpful and sometimes incentivizing us to get the job done. So we really thank you.
Glad to hear it.
Anyone else? Jay?
Thank you very much, Jennica, for all of your help over the last year. You've done a lot of work on a lot of really different and important things. I hope you realize that you're going to a much larger estuary, which is really a wonderful one. As someone who grew up on Chesapeake Bay, you will quickly come to realize that the crabs are tastier there.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Jay.
Joe?
Yeah, so Jennica, I really want to thank you because it was a big mammoth task we had, and there was changeover of personnel, and you really were so organized and patient, especially very diplomatic when you are sending the emails, but still persuasive that, hey, we need, oh, I'm planning to do this tomorrow. So you don't have to tell that it's needed tomorrow. So likewise, unbounded energy. So I don't know how you get that, but certainly thank you very much. We really, really appreciate what you did. And all the very best.
Thanks, Joe.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, I just want to echo everything that's been said, Jennica, and thank you for everything you've done for us. It's been, I don't know if we would have gotten through the monitoring enterprise review without you. So thank you, and just best of luck with your next stage of your career.
Thanks, Tanya.
Okay, well, thanks. Feel free, of course, to get back to us and ask us for any help you might need that we could provide. Edmund, any public comment on this?
There are none.
Okay, well, thanks again. And we're due for a 15-minute break time right now. The next, I'd move on, but the next two items are kind of related to each other. So let's go ahead and take that, and which would be coming back at around 2:37 or wherever time zone you're in. 15 minutes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are recording a broadcast. The floor is yours.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. The next two items are somewhat related in a sense. The item we'll talk about next is getting an update on the assessment of the impact and value of the Delta Independent Science Board and what actions we may take in response to those recommendations, at least preliminary discussions. And then we'll talk about our two recently completed reviews in item 7 and see if we can implement some of those and think about where we might want to take sort of the next steps after the completion of those two reviews, where we might go. So we'll start with the, as background, I believe you've all received the final report, just came out a couple days ago from the assessment of our program, our board. And we've asked Lauren Hastings, the lead author of that report, to give us an update on any, particularly on any changes that were made since the last time, between the last time we've seen that draft and the final draft. So Lauren, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Steve. So I am very pleased to be presenting the final draft of our assessment of the impact and value of the Delta Independent Science Board. And I do want to acknowledge the other team members and co-authors, Chelsea Batavia and Edmund Yu. And we've all worked very hard on this report, and I think we're all very glad to be bringing it to completion and presenting it to you today. So as a reminder, we have presented to you twice previously on this effort. First, we gave a presentation on initial findings on April 16th, 2021, just about a year ago, and then a presentation on the public draft document this fall on November 15th, 2021. After that, we provided a 30-day public comment period and responded to those comments for the final draft. What I can say is the product has not changed significantly to get to the question that Steve asked. We did modify the document based on public comment, but the findings and considerations have not changed significantly. So because we previously provided fairly detailed presentations, I am not planning to do a detailed walkthrough on our report today, but instead, I was going to just remind you big picture of our objectives and approach, then the findings and considerations that we presented in the executive summary and conclusions chapter. And then finally, my goal today is to present some highlights for you to consider for your discussion. Our understanding is that you will be providing a formal response to our assessment report. So next slide. So the objectives for this assessment were to document usages of board products completed between 2010 and 2020, to determine how the board has influenced the Delta, meaning its impacts, and to understand the significance of those impacts, meaning the value of the board and its products. We are reporting findings of this assessment to you today to inform improvement to board processes and to increase the value and impacts of your products. Next slide. Our approach has been to collect 3 types of information, which we did in the fall of 2020. First, we developed an inventory of Delta Independent Science Board products and verifiable uses or applications of those products. We gathered stakeholder perceptions of the Delta Independent Science Board and its products based on 26 interviews and a survey that received 174 responses. And third, we interviewed 11 current and past Delta ISB members to gather their observations and advice on board processes and products. As a reminder, in this report, we, the authors, did not provide any of our own recommendations. Rather, we analyzed the information we received in the survey and interviews, and we present it as overarching findings, considerations for the Delta Independent Science Board, and considerations for the Delta Stewardship Council. So right now, I'm just, for refreshing your memory, going to read through the 14 findings and considerations. And then on the last slide, I'm going to provide some highlights to support your conversation today. So next slide, please. So first, the 6 overarching findings. The Delta Independent Science Board is recognized as an important source of independent scientific oversight and review in the Delta. Second, after 10 years, the Delta ISB has an established yet evolving process for conducting reviews within the scope of its legislative mandate. 3, Delta ISB products are used in a variety of ways, but most often in policy and management applications. 4, implementation of Delta ISB recommendations is nuanced and not always direct. 5, a range of outcomes and influences beyond implementation of recommendations is associated with the Delta ISB and its products. 6, many stakeholders felt increased engagement would improve Delta ISB reviews and increase the likelihood that recommendations will be implemented. Next slide, please. So now the 5 considerations for the Delta ISB. Item number 7, stakeholders conveyed largely positive attitudes about the board and expressed affirmations for its products and other contributions to the Delta. 8, some stakeholders felt the board has erred on the side of maintaining too much independence and urged the Delta ISB to better familiarize itself with the realities of Delta science and management. 9, some felt the board could seek more input from the stakeholder community when selecting topics for review. 10, some stakeholders encouraged engagement with target implementers as recommendations are formulated to increase the likelihood that Delta ISB recommendations will be implemented. 11, outreach and communication were widely identified as areas for improvement. Next slide, please. Then there were 3 considerations that involved the Delta Stewardship Council specifically. Number 12, interviews with both stakeholders and Delta ISB members revealed encouragement for greater and more deliberate interaction between the Delta ISB and the council. 13, several board members felt that the council, which is by statute the primary recipient of all Delta ISB reviews, should go beyond improving communication to raise awareness of Delta ISB reviews and more actively promote implementation of review recommendations. And finally, 14, tracking implementation of Delta ISB recommendations was identified as a gap that should be filled. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to we pulled together some highlights for discussion today. These are basically themes that we collated across all of the findings and considerations. So first, the influence of Delta ISB, the Delta Independent Science Board, and the outcomes of its reviews go beyond direct implementation of recommendations. This is a reminder that many interviewees described how ISB recommendations can provide important momentum, leverage, or justification for current, planned, or proposed activities, but may not in themselves directly catalyze action. We also learned that ISB products provide scientific contributions, can catalyze community responses, such as workshops, provide support to Delta stakeholders through affirmation or credibility, or direct attention to important issues such as rapid change. Next, we heard that it is highly important to many that the Delta Independent Science Board members be familiar with Delta problems, processes, and people while retaining the recognition of the board as an independent body. Several recommended increased engagement with stakeholders at various stages of review, especially early in the process when the Delta ISB is scoping and selecting review topics, and later when the board is formulating recommendations to better ensure relevance of the topics and feasibility of implementing recommendations. The board may wish to discuss how it wants to approach and balance engagement and independence. That is being part of, yet apart from the Delta, as we highlighted in our report. And finally, we heard that enhancing outreach, communication, and tracking of responses to Delta ISB reviews are areas for improvement. Some suggested the Delta ISB should consider developing a communication strategy, recognizing that the board has many audiences, and that ISB members, in addition, that ISB members could have conversations with council and Delta Science Program staff about varying roles in terms of outreach, communication, and tracking. The council has tools to support these areas, including public platforms such as council meetings and connections to other agencies through the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, or DPIC. So I was going to have a very brief introduction today and leave most of the time for your discussion. And I also welcome any questions or comments.
Thanks, Lauren. I just have one quick follow-up. You also had recommendations specifically for the council. Is the council taking any actions on those? Or will they tell you how they're going to react to those?
Well, I think we were waiting to finalize this report just as your board wanted to wait before you responded to us. So now we've finalized it. So I think now would be the time to have those conversations. And I would encourage you all to think about if you would like to be involved in those conversations or how you'd like to approach those considerations.
it looks like some of those are mutual things, but it seems to me that have you presented the recommendations to the council for their actions that they needed to take?
We have not done any formal presentations to the council on this report. We've had internal briefings to the executive staff. And we especially highlighted those three that are with respect to the council. So we've had the internal conversations, but that's it. No formal presentations or direct follow-up yet.
Okay, one more final question, just to clarify. As you know, stakeholders, and we've just had this discussion with the MER, where we had surveys and interviews and comments about the nature of the surveys and who responded, and interviews and who took part of it. And it seems to me that depending on the nature of the stakeholder, their answer about whether or not they took actions on our recommendations or even were aware of them would seem to be highly dependent on the who the stakeholder was and the type of audience it was. Council members get presented our recommendations directly, as do very likely DPIC, at least the head of the DPIC gets those recommendations directly. In other cases, there are certainly other stakeholders across that never hear from us directly because they don't attend scientific meetings and so forth. Is there a particular audience that you think we're missing, or is it review dependent, or is it any sense of that?
Yeah, well, I think, and I think your board has discussed this before, is recognizing that there are likely different audiences for the different reviews, and trying to figure out what are the audiences that are especially relevant for each review, and how do you target those audiences? My interpretation of what we heard from the folks that we interviewed in the surveys is that I think they would benefit from additional direct outreach to the appropriate audiences. You know, and you're starting to do this, I believe. For example, I am aware that with the MER review, the Monitoring Enterprise Review, that you have presented to the camped audience, for example, already, which is a very relevant audience for a monitoring review. So I think that's a big part of what you may want to consider is how you want to approach that outreach and communication. You know, how you want to target it depending on the specific audiences. And I think science program staff can help you identify those audiences, as can council staff. And I think we can also help facilitate, you know, getting the opportunities to communicate with those various audiences.
Okay, let's go to Bob and then Tom.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for the presentation. I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'm just going to ask one to start. Could tell me a little bit about how representative was your canvassing of the stakeholders? Did it, if I recall correctly, you received responses, I think, from around 40 interviewees or approximately. But how representative was that collection compared to the stakeholders that we may interact with in the Delta?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was, I believe, 26. We interviewed 26 individuals, sometimes in a group setting, not necessarily one-on-one interviews. We also heard from, we had 174 responses to the survey that we sent out as well. And so we had to select who we could interview. We had certain time limitations because you can imagine it's very time intensive to do those interviews. And so, and we chose, and we described this in our report, we chose to interview folks that had been very interactive with the board in the first 10 years, because our report was focusing on 2010 to 2020, knowing that they would be most aware and have most input on what the board had done during that 10-year time period. So we were not able to interview every single relevant stakeholder.
Were there significant sectors that are missing? Or are there sectors that are missing that are important?
Well, and we have the list of interviewees, or at least I'm trying to remember now, the entities that they represented in our report. I would say one of them is the environmental NGO community. And that is in part because we haven't had as much direct involvement, not we, but they haven't been involved as much in the board during that time period. So we tried to identify who those individuals would be and struggled to find appropriate representatives from that community.
Okay, well, thank you.
My turn.
Yeah.
Lauren, I wanted to compliment you on the report. I found it thought-provoking when I read it. It made me think about how we do our reviews. And for the rest of the board, I've talked about it a little bit, but the way we're approaching the subsidence review is really taking into account those findings about the stakeholders. And we're starting with a series of conversations before we've even written the prospectus to help let them sort of define what the issues are, and then we can turn on the science that's relevant to those issues that are of relevance to the stakeholders. And we're not very far into it yet, but already it's been very educational, I think, to all of us in terms of what we're learning from the stakeholders we've talked to. And sometimes they have conflicting views about things. And it's interesting to hear it, so that I think you can look at the subsidence review as a test case in actually implementing some of the findings from Lauren's report. And thanks again.
Great, thanks, Tom.
All right, Tanya, then Lisa.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren, and of course, Chelsea and Edmund as well for all the work that you did on this report. And I think it's really sparked some good conversations among the board over the last year. And as Tom said, we're already thinking about ways to implement some of the recommendations. I think what we could do as a board, though, and this is a comment not to you, Lauren, but to us as a board, is to, you know, in kind of the spirit of adaptive management, so to speak, take some of these recommendations and reflect on them maybe a little more deeply. I think we could easily kind of take this and kind of informally think, oh, we should, you know, add more stakeholders to the preliminary process of how we do our reviews. But I think we could be a little more systematic, perhaps, as a board, and think about maybe some guiding principles that would be useful for articulating kind of what are our criteria, what are our values, what are our approaches that we should be using when we think about doing reviews, when we think about engaging both, you know, at all stages of the review process, at the beginning, middle, and the end. And how to, and especially as we have new board members coming on, you know, if we leave it to kind of the tacit knowledge of the board or the kind of informal norms that we have without really articulating this, I think some of that information can get lost and buried and forgotten. So I would encourage us to maybe continue to take this and make it more formalized in terms of how we respond and what our responsibility is as a board. And then on the communication side of things, on those recommendations, I think it would be really helpful for us as a board to have some periodic conversations with council and staff on how we can coordinate those outreach efforts and the communication strategy that's recommended. I think that would be really helpful. So that's it. Thank you again.
Yeah, and Tanya, I think we are planning to follow up on your suggestions. So I'm going to ignore them, but I really would like to engage on that. And I too just want to thank the team. You know, it was a lot of work to put this together. I think I note some very careful wording that helps bring together disparate comments, and I do appreciate all the work that went into that. I would like to take on this issue you brought up about the engagement of the Delta Science Council and maybe the Delta Science Program and the ISB. I'm wondering, you know, you said, Lauren, you admitted that you didn't put in your personal recommendations, and now I'm going to ask you to think about some personal recommendations, which is, you know, I need to better understand the flow of how you all develop your strategic directions, and then at what point is it most useful for us to enter? Are we contributing to your strategic directions? Can we help you adapt and implement some of your strategic directions? You know, I feel like there's more we could be doing in collaboration with the DSC and the DSP. And I just wondered what you think.
Mm-hmm. So just for my clarification, when you said you, did you mean science program or Delta Stewardship Council, or both together? Or?
Well, I meant more the DSC, but since Laurel's not here, you know, I'm also interested in the DSP, and I have to admit, not completely understanding how your two strategic directions combine. It's not something I have clearly in my head at this point.
Right, okay. And perhaps that's something we should clarify for you at some point. That would be good. Yeah, I can, you know, I'm part of the Delta Science Program, which is part of the larger Delta Stewardship Council. And so I'm mainly more involved in discussions about the directions the science program is taking, being, you know, a manager and part of the leadership team for the Delta Science Program. So I think you asked, how does the board engage with us? I don't think there's been a real deliberate interaction. I think there's more of that now, right now, you know, kind of this recognition. I think the discussion of a harmful algal bloom workshop, you know, that the board was thinking about a review, and the science program is planning to put on a workshop, and there's been some discussions there. So I think that's a relatively new development, more of this, how do we help each other? I think one of our jobs, and I think Laurel is doing a good job of this now, is letting you all know more about what the science program is doing and is planning to do, so that you're aware of it and can consider it when you're talking about your own work plan and your own plans for reviews. So I think it's the usual, just increased communication about those things, and deliberate discussions about that. I think you're aware there are opportunities for discussion of the Delta Independent Science Board chairship and leadership at the council, as well as with the Delta lead scientists. So I think those are your opportunities to share information. I would welcome suggestions from all of you, what you'd like to see to make improvements there. I do want to say that I think my interpretation of what we heard from the folks that we talked to in the interviews was more about getting the board's reviews out to the public and getting more input directly to the board while scoping your reviews.
Yeah, I just hope we can have some more deeper conversations about this, but thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
So again, one more kudos for three of you. Thank you very much for the useful report. It struck me that the report said that our recommendations are nuanced, and sometimes that basically prevents to implementation. Does that mean that the things we are writing in kind of moderated so that we don't annoy people, or is it, what is the exact meaning of that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on there. One, the bullet talking about implementation is nuanced meant that our our analysis of what we found is that it wasn't all that common for an actual ISB recommendation as written to be implemented as written. We found some examples of that, but what we tended to find and what we heard, especially more in the interviews when we could get more qualitative responses from the people we talked with, is that they would express that even though a review came out on a specific topic, maybe they or their organization didn't implement it directly, it still influenced what they did. And it influenced what they did in different ways. Sometimes it was that it added to the scientific literature. Great. Or it supported things they were already had on their planned list to do. One of the appreciations that we heard was it was nice for many of the folks that we talked to if the board also came out in favor of a particular next step that they were already planning to do or thinking about doing. And it was almost this weight of evidence. It would tend to help tip the scales to support them actually doing it. But the board in and of itself, they didn't necessarily decide to do it because the board recommended it, but it supported them doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And probably in the future, we have to be more aware of what they are doing, because most of the time they send their comments back the public review period. We get good comments, and that basically can be melded in some way to mention some of the things are happening already, and that can be further strengthened by the report, the way we are writing. But thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Virginia.
Well, again, thank you. You guys have done a great job, and this is extremely helpful in a process that should go through, that should occur regularly because it is so helpful. But as you said, it covered 22 to 2020, and several of us have come on since that time, and particularly we have a strong social science component now. Are you willing to let us know from your personal perspective what kind of things you think we have not even attempted to address that you see standing out? Because we've talked about a lot of these things and we haven't implemented them all, but are there big ones that you're kind of disappointed you haven't even heard us mention in the discussions?
Do you mean reviews that the board hasn't attempted in the first 10 years? I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, I don't mean, particular reviews, but like, I think we spent a lot of time talking about better outreach to stakeholders, and we spent some time talking a little bit about communications. We could do that better. But are there things that from your perspective or anyone else on the phone, even including the board, that we haven't even talked about that we need to be thinking of that have kind of slipped through the cracks?
Well, I would say, our report it's still relatively recent, and it was certainly within the time period of the 6 new board members that started in, I guess it was September of 2020. So I think it's very relevant for especially this kind of new board. And as Tom pointed out, I can see you're already, taking into consideration what we found. So I think now is the time. I think all the reviews that you're looking at now is the time to start really thinking about what our report said and considering and discussing how you want to make changes and how you may scope reviews, how you may implement reviews, communicate about reviews, formulate recommendations, how you want to balance independence and involvement. So I would encourage you to do that. So, I would say, to answer your question, I think there are a number of things that you haven't yet taken up, but I think it's because, again, it's still pretty new. And I think it's for these new reviews that you're scoping right now, that would be the place to really start considering them.
Okay, I'm not saying it isn't relevant. I'm saying it is relevant. And I think we've tried to do some of these, but I also agree with you that some of them we haven't put in.
Right, right. I mean, for example, the conversations with the council that Steve was talking about. So go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I would also like to, I'll start with my question first, and then I'll give you a long history. The question is, what specifically have we not yet done yet? It seems like, you know, throughout the board, at least the last 7 or 8 years that I've been on it, we have continually discussed this issue. And in terms of stakeholder engagement at the beginning and at the end in particular, of where we're going to try and make our reviews more relevant. Every review, we talk about the question of who's the target audience, how specific should we be in our recommendations, and in targeting a particular agency to take the action. IEP is probably the extreme case where we target it towards IEP. I think, and we took a number of steps along the line. I think the whole prospectus, I'm just looking at the prospectus right now, and the second line and required in our prospectus is to identify the intended audience for the review. You know, and so, and we've done surveys about topics, we've had meetings, and I think so. I think the good part now, we've always had this feel that there was a need to keep strengthening, I want to say, the bookends of our reviews. I don't think any board member has ever disagreed with that. I think what you've done now is more or less crystallize that and pointed out that maybe were some more specific areas we could work on. But I wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the first part of your review says how well received our reviews are, how well, what a large impact we've had and so forth. And I think we want to, and to me, the diversity of 50 products that you talked about and the nuances that they all are a little bit different in terms of their, depending on the topic, how whether or not recommendations are adopted. I think that's a good thing, because I think if we became too narrowly prescriptive so that every recommendation was adopted, they would not be something that was challenging. It would not be something that's very likely multi-agency in perspective, which a lot of our recommendations are. And we also want to have that inspirational level to it. And I think that the nuance one that you point out in the review had to do with the memo related to a rapid changing environment. To me, that had a direct consequence, because we presented it to DPIC and they came up with a specific charge to us and others to do the science needs assessment and do something. But also now you see this in light of rapidly changing environment, and almost every single thing that comes out of the Delta, you know, it's always referred to because, you know, and maybe with citing the publication and so forth, but I think that influence is there. You know, it influenced the field in the Delta, even though we never actually came up with a specific recommendation about that, just that something needs to be done. And I think so I suggest what we do is, again, we look at what we're doing now. In the last 3 months, we've instituted a lot of new things. All Day Tomorrow is designed to hear from agencies, and they have specific questions. And in the last couple of months of meetings, you know, what do you think is most important, and what do you think we as a board can do for you? You know, that's a new element we've added. And so again, I'm going to ask, what are we missing? You know, do we need to do more? Is there certain sorts of communication products that we don't produce, or some sort of a blog or newsletter or something specific that could be added to our list of things?
Yeah, great conversation. So what I would say is what you pointed out, Steve, we've documented that in our report, you know, the influence that the rapid change memo and letter have had. And so we've got that documented now. And it completely agrees with what you just said. And also I wanted to point out, our report, I think, is talking about what more you can do. It's, you know, how to enhance, how to improve. And one of the things I thought was very interesting that we learned is that in many cases, some folks, they're really busy, they have a lot going on. We found that they more often than not paid attention to the final product, and they may not have even been aware that you had a prospectus out, you know, a target audience group. They didn't even know about the prospectus. They didn't know that you had asked for input on what topics to review, because they are busy. They're busy people. This is the challenge I think we all have. The science program has, the council has, all of us have this challenge of really busy people and how to get their attention on our thing. So I think the good news is they did seem aware of the final products, and then they would start talking about it. And then they would start wondering, well, why did they do it this way and not the way that I would have recommended, even though you had provided them those opportunities more than once. So I think a challenge is how to reach those audiences, those really busy people who are highly, you know, definitely a target audience member. How do you get their input early on? And I would put out there that one of the ways is, again, what Tom mentioned, maybe early on have a direct invite to certain individuals that are members of that target audience to have these conversations. You know, not just at a public ISB meeting I mean, I think you should still do this, but not just putting out a broad, please give us your input, please review our prospectus. But it seems like more focused invitations for conversations or for taking a look at a draft product are probably higher likely to elicit a response than kind of a broad announcement.
And I totally agree with you. Unfortunately, my mind is still filled with the monitoring enterprise review. I'm trying to forget it, but it's still there. And in that case, I sort of look at your recommendations and say in my mind and say, what could we have done better? And there was that initial workshop where we had 60 people invited there to say, what should we include in that inventory, for example, and in the review. And those recommendations were taken into account. And then following up, there was actual interviews of the agency leads after we had preliminary results to say, what do you think about these? You know, so we hit the interviews before it was done, and we had workshops at the very beginning. And I'm trying to think what other kind of things we might have missed in that one, but I know that wasn't part of your review. But
to respond to that, Steve, I think, you know, the monitoring enterprise reviews span this time period. You know, some of it was completed, the component one was completed during the time period of what we reviewed, but obviously this part you've just now completed was not part of our review.
Right.
And so I think the MER really falls into we determined you've had an evolving process for doing your reviews. And I think some of these ideas were incorporated for the MER review where they really weren't for some of the earlier reviews. So, you know, I think, like you said, just that workshop alone, getting people aware of the review. I think the MER people were very much aware of that review. I mean, it made it into the governor's, you know, water resiliency strategy. So it made it to that level of awareness. So, so that seemed to work.
Thanks. Jay?
The other thing, if I can just add one more thing, I was saying the new reviews that you're scoping, here's an opportunity to try out some new ideas. I would say also for the reviews you're just completed for the MER and for the water supply reliability estimation, to consider what additional outreach, I know you've done some, but what additional outreach might you want to do? You as the board members, or what other support might you be seeking from the council or from science program? So there's opportunities there as well to try out these new ideas.
Okay, Jay.
Thank you very much for this assessment and all the team and the protracted time it took to do this under sometimes very difficult conditions. I have just a few thoughts. we really do need to engage more with the council and with DPIC. I think strategically it's the last year or so has really made it evident to me that we really need to have some serious sustained engagement with both those two levels beyond the council and to DPIC. We might consider, in the past, we've had systematic efforts by the chair of the council to have the members of the science board get to know members on the council. And that really hasn't happened, of course, during COVID and during our suspension of in-person meetings. But I think something like that would be useful. Some targeted efforts to get the council members to know us and for us to know the council members. I think that's probably the lower hanging fruit in that kind of a level of engagement. One thing that I've seen other boards do is to have particular board members become semi-official or informal liaisons with other organizations. So we might have it so that we would have one of our board members, perhaps on a rotating basis, be the liaison with the council and with the science program within the council, just so that there's a more direct conduit into our board members of what that other organization is doing. And if we decide that's successful, we might want to get more ambitious about it and have it a similar kind of a liaison arrangement, probably a less intense level with other major DPIC members. On this engagement and conduct of our reviews, I think every review is going to be different. Every review is going to have different satisfied and dissatisfied parties in terms of wanting to get engaged in the scoping of the review, the conduct of the review, and the release and digestion of the review after it's released. I think we're doing much better on this than we started off with, certainly when I started on the board. But I would also caution us against the fallacy of perfection in this business. What I see in agencies is a tendency when there's imperfection to prolong the process and increase the transaction costs without really improving the product. And I think we could seriously get into that realm easily here by prolonging the process and not improving the product on average as we go along. What you've given us is really a great set of ideas, as Tanya mentioned, for our ongoing discussions about how we should operate as a board, how we should engage on the board, not only with our reviews, but just in general. And I hope we get to a point where we can reflect some of those discussions in a revision to our operating guidelines. Thank you again for all your work on this.
Thanks.
Yeah, to follow up on Jay's last comment is Lisa and Jay and I have begun to look at our current guidelines and see about the possibility of modifying them. And the guidelines can be modified with a 2/3 majority, I believe, vote of the board members. But the idea is to look in there, see if there's anything we want to change or update. Certainly the new language relative to our existence will need to be incorporated in the guidelines to update the status of that. And there may be other areas in there. We put in there the perspective and what that's all about. And we should look at it and see if there are obvious areas that, hey, this could be updated. And I share Jay's caution without being too prescriptive, because they are guidelines, and I think that there are different reviews and different memos and everything require different approaches, and we want to maintain our own flexibility. So I think the thought would be is we'll continue this conversation and think if there's things specifically we want to do, and more, maybe make it more formalized part of our process, and then decide whether we want to go to the next step and actually update our guidelines relative to that. And once we have a board sort of agreement as where we want to go and how we want to do it. And if there's anything specific, then we would specifically write a memo to Lauren in outlining our response to that. There's one other thought along these lines is, you know, we do talk, the board, the Delta chair and the council chair and the program chair lead do talk monthly about various kinds of issues. So we do have a dialogue, and you know, we've already talked about addressing some of the things already in Lauren's report in that casual conversation. And I think one of the things to consider about the council is, you know, they don't run research, so they can't really start research programs, but a way they might be valuable, and this is something we would continue this dialogue, but I can propose it now, is that that things that we recommend, they have the ability to fold that in to either the science plan or the Delta plan or the Delta science plan or the science action agenda, to make it part of the science strategy. And if it seems to me that science strategy, which are those three components, is what people use to set science priorities. And if we can get our recommendations somehow folded in or adopted as part of the formal science strategy, then maybe that is a way that the agencies will pay closer attention, funding agencies in particular, pay closer attention to that. So that's one area we could continue those discussions. Any other thoughts about where to go or what to do next on this? Should we put it on the April agenda with drinks? I see at least one thumbs up, so. Okay.
Well, I would suggest that maybe the chairship, executive council, whatever we call ourselves, come up with some talking points and some things to respond to before the next meeting, and then hopefully we can get that done before the next meeting, and then we can and use our time with Lauren and others to think through some specific questions.
That's a great idea. And if any of the board members have any thoughts or suggestions or nightmares about it, just send us an email that we can consider in our first go at this.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Thank you.
I believe we have one written comment on this topic, and which public comment. And Edmund, do we have any oral public comments?
Yeah, we also have an oral comment from Deirdre. Deirdre, you have permission to unmute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation before you provide your public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I wanted to apologize to Lauren for getting in the NGO comments on the review late. Our community, the NGO community, has been very involved with concerns about the situation with the winter run, and also with the long-term operations of the Central Valley Project. And our comments did discuss the unprecedented loss of integrity in the federal process that produced the biological opinion. And people were worried that it was going to be catastrophic for salmon, and it has been. And I looked back before the November 15th meeting, I was working on a comprehensive summary of integrated modeling efforts, which I did produce for the Independent Science Board. And then during the 30-year comment period, I was preparing to have an operation, which I had put off since being hit by a crop hauling semi in Westlands Water District in 2014. So we're just, the NGO community is limited in bandwidth. And I also wanted to point out, with respect to engaging NGOs, they don't have, unlike the water agencies, they don't have funding for full-time staff to dedicate to liaisoning with the Delta Science Program. And so if you look around the room and say, oh, who's been most involved? It's not going to be the NGOs because their staff wear a lot of different hats and there's a lot of different processes. So I think that's important. We did raise that in our comments. And then another issue is the whole discussion of inadvertent advocacy was an issue. And I think the elephant in the room here is the values discussion. And I'd really like to see that be discussed openly about what are the values that the Delta Independent Science Board should use in their reviews. And there is very clear law on this. We put it into our comment letter. The policy that's in the Delta Reform Act is very clear about recovery of native species and the public trust and reasonable use. And that, that's in the review and it deserves some kind of open discussion. We do support the recommendation for transparent consideration of values and think that maybe explicitly considering these policies in the Delta Reform Act would actually be a good exercise. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Deidre. And I think that we have your public comment relative to the Hastings report as well. Now that it's public, we'll certainly be looking at that as well in our considerations of where we want to go. I did have one follow-up question that I forgot to ask Lauren. Again, thank you very much for for this review, and I do want to put you on the spot because we'd asked before about missing audiences. What audiences are we missing? And I don't know that we're missing any who actually do research, but those that control research. Do you think there's a role or an audience that we should be making presentations to the state legislature? Do you think that's an audience we're not getting to?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, Jay. That's recorded, so.
That's an excellent idea. I think I would highly recommend that the science program present these results to the leadership, staff leadership, and perhaps some of the lead legislators for the Senate and California Senate and Assembly water committees. And failing that, I think you should send a copy of this report to each of those committees and with a offering to sit down and discuss the results with those committees, because certainly the science board largely exists as a creature of those committees.
And Jay, I was also suggesting, are we missing them as an audience for our reports?
I think that is very true. I think we should think about having an annual short report to each of those committees.
Lisa.
Jay has the institutional knowledge here, so I'm not disputing anything he just said, but I would think that kind of back to Tanya's comments about what are our processes and how do we screen these things. I would imagine that we would need kind of a screening process. Not everything we produce is going to really be policy relevant. And so we should use that judiciously is all I would suggest, because if we otherwise it's like crying wolf. Oh, the ISB is here again with another boring set of recommendations. You really want to target when you have something useful.
I completely agree, but I think we do need to give them something, if only to set a high bar for us about what we produce, but also to remind them that we exist and we exist for a reason. And I think that was part of the problem that we had a year ago.
Yeah, and on average, we produce about one of these major reviews per year. And the major reviews I'm talking about, even though memos sometimes have a bigger impact. And they invariably always involve multiple agencies in terms of the scope of where the recommendations lie. So.
Indeed, if this has been a successful kind of an institution, Perhaps the legislature would like to develop similar institutions in other areas of state responsibility.
To your point, Steve, even if we only have one review, there will probably still be things we've done in the past that will have new relevance or be evergreen. And I think we could, maybe to Jay's point, always have, a set of things that we would.
Well, and in addition, it's an opportunity for them to ask us questions.
And maybe they have ideas for reviews.
Yes.
They wrote the legislation that tells us to do reviews. Maybe they have ideas of what reviews they want.
Oh, and in fact, they're in a position to influence some of the agencies to take up some of the recommendations of our reviews and to support those kind of recommendations.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. I think we're ready to move on to item number 7. And item number 7 is a discussion of potential action item, or actually the next steps for the monitoring enterprise review and the water supply reliability review. So now we can put our April ideas into effect right now. As I think all of you know, the monitoring review has been, we approved the content of the report. It's been absolutely finished, and it is now with the program staff for production. We are also, as you know, presenting a poster at the March 22nd to 24th workshop of IEP that summarizes those recommendations. And we plan to present to the council, I believe it's April 28th, the results. That's our formal presentation. By April, we expect that the final product will be out, and we'll make that presentation formally to the council then. And the water supply reliability is in its final stages, and the plan is to present final stages for presenting it to staff for publication, and it will be presented to the council in May. So what else we need to do? What other sorts of things now, taking Lauren's report into account? Where else should we present it? We've also made a request to DPIC in their meeting past March, I'm not sure when that is, to make a presentation to the MER monitoring review to DPIC during that time. So now we're in a position of brainstorming for other ideas for outreach or modifications or tracking progress of our recommendations. How do we go about doing that, Jay?
I think particularly for the MER, it's such a big effort, involves so many agencies, so many interests. We should think about having a workshop that's maybe an all-day workshop, certainly a half-day, maybe an all-day workshop that involves all the major parties that are interested in this kind of review and our recommendations, where we present our recommendations, discuss our recommendations, and then a little bit about the process. Not have it belabor the process and the long agonizing history of developing it, but talk about the real substance. And then basically badger some of the agencies to say, okay, well, what would be in everybody's interest to sort of move this thing forward? Well, badger, let's not, we've stricken that word from the record, but you know what I mean. But I think a workshop is a good way of engaging folks. I also think the legislature should get a synopsis of this and an opportunity to talk with us about it.
I also, by the way, just casually talked to Steve Culberson about, who's head of the IEP, who had a lot of really good public comments on our review, and of course coordinates a lot of the monitoring in the Delta. If he would like to sit down and just have a discussion with the lead writers on this and see if he has any questions, how to implement it and do that. So he's agreed to do that at some time in the future.
That would be a good lead up to a workshop.
Okay, I see Diane and Joe, do you still have a question?
I took my, I lowered my hand because Jay mentioned that, because if you remember that Lauren mentioned that this MER review got some attention from the from the governor's office. So this may be a good opportunity for us to get some of these material in a very concise form presented to legislature in some manner, in a strategic way. So we might want to think about, so I echo what Jay said.
Okay, Diane.
So this may be a bit of an off the wall suggestion. I've been walking over to the aerospace building because there's better copy over there, and they're always playing on this big screen these NASA videos that are in the format of someone interviewing the engineer who did the landing plan for the Mars Science Lab, and it's sort of this informational video, but clearly they've known what the questions are, but it's you know, something that you can watch while you're drinking coffee and chilling out. So maybe this could be something to try for either the monitoring enterprise or the water supply reliability report, which has some particularly challenging concepts. And our new postdocs could be the moderator and sort of interview Jay and interview Tom. And it's just a suggestion, and we put it on YouTube. And if nobody watches it and they complain, then we can point them to the YouTube video. I warned you it would be sort of off the wall, but we could try it.
Jay, you're on mute.
Certainly, if you had a workshop that had some formal presentations, some of those presentations might be interviews, panel interviews that could be archived on YouTube that way. Good idea.
And I suppose one can always ask the question, you know, when you, and maybe Lauren has an answer to this, when you talk about audience and implementation of recommendations, you know, if you're dealing with a state or federal agency, and I'll say this hypothetically so I don't get in trouble, you know, there's a couple ways to get agencies to act, and one is to convince them it's in their best interest and valuable and the right thing to do. Another thing is to convince the public that that's the case, and the general public, broad range of stakeholders, and so they can equally apply as much pressure as we can to implement recommendations. And the third, as Jay suggested, is go to something like a legislature and getting things done that way. But I don't know that we've spent as much time in the broad stakeholder arena in the, you know, after our reports are out. We try and go to the agencies and DPIC and council, but I don't know that we've done it in other than through our meetings and the council meetings, done it in a broad way to convince folks that this is the right way to go. We've done it a little bit on invasives, but I'm not sure we have in other areas. So Diane, okay, Tom, I guess then.
Unmute here. Yeah, I like Diane's suggestion. I don't know how many of you watched the YouTube video on the conveyance structure. I think there were 2 or 3 of them. And I looked at those and I actually learned a lot. And the advantage was I could look at it at a time that was convenient for me. And so I wasn't distracted by other stuff. I wanted to learn something about the conveyance structure. So somebody who has an interest in monitoring could come to the YouTube video, you know, when it's a good time for them. So it's just modern communication, I think.
Well, you know, there are folks that specialize in developing communication strategies, and I think that it kind of sounds in some ways that is what Lauren is suggesting, an actual strategy that we use, which uses a variety of approaches. Joe?
I wonder whether the council has any press office, that type of a liaison because usually the state employees are very hesitant to go to press because they have to be vetted all the time. I remember when I was in Phoenix area, there was the Urban Heat Island project, and they are very worried about what the perception will be from the state, from the legislature. So they are quite worried giving any comments about this. So if the council has some type of press office, so we know that is the kind of official thing. So maybe Lauren might want to make some comments about it.
Well, we have a communications unit, a communications director, Abbott Benton. And we have a liaison to the legislature. It's still Ryan Stanbra. So yes, the council has those people in those leadership positions. And that's a big part of their job, is helping to facilitate communication to the various audiences.
So we can really go through them to put this thing into the forefront, starting with the MER, water resources, water supply reliability, all those special.
Yes. Yeah, I think those are the kind of conversations I recommend you have with the council staff, council executive staff, is what kind of help you'd like to get from them for those audiences. The council also puts together video blogs, so, and has connections to YouTube.
Yep, Diane, it's right there.
Okay, Jay?
The council also has its own blog, and I imagine that we could, if they're interested, use that blog to write little synopses of some of our reviews for a wider audience.
Yes, I would think that would be supported.
Would there be any potential for conflict, Lauren? Say if we wanted to make recommendations that might be somewhat controversial, would that be a problem?
I don't know. I think you should have the conversations with the communications staff and executive leadership.
I can't imagine anything would be that controversial. I mean, we're sticking to science-based things.
Yeah,
but, I'm just wondering if like, you know, we didn't want to appear to be speaking for the council is what I'm worried about. Is that a problem?
Right. Well, I think you do need to recognize that you are independent, the Independent Science Board, and I think you're treated that way. You've got connections to the council because you need that administrative support. So I think those are issues to work out, to talk through.
Does the new chair want to start a Twitter account when she takes over as?
Jay's the expert, but yeah, I think that could be good. I've made that suggestion.
If done right, if done judiciously.
Any other thoughts on a way forward for us?
I don't know if this has been brought up yet, but I know that there's a lot of things that are used as references for the reviews that come out of the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science Journal. So I was wondering if there was any thought towards putting together maybe like an opinion piece or like some kind of like highlight short thing, on that journal specifically, because sometimes they will even tweet it out for you so that you don't have to worry about it. So since that is an established medium, it seems to be, maybe it would be ideal to use that as a way of outreach also.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We've done that in terms of our adaptive management review. We actually put a publication together for that, as well as the concept of a rapid change. I know John Weens, a former board member, and I have talked about extracting something out of the invasive species report and seeing if that could be used, again, probably in that journal. And so I'd ask the question if there's anything in the water supply reliability or monitoring that could also be thought of to as an article. I really think that the concept of the adaptive management approach to monitoring that we've now have that figure 4 and everything, and it's one of our concepts in the monitoring enterprise review, I think could be put together as a manuscript and explaining its approach and all the value it may have to solve some of the issues relative to monitoring in general. So, but there may be others, and that's one way to do it, is to do it as a science article. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, continuing with that, for example, we have Diane and Jay, so maybe they can write opinion piece for National Academy, one of the publications like Science or something that might get some attention. Not a regular article, but it's an opinion type article. So that's just a suggestion.
Yeah, there's a lot of outlets. And we have to decide, I think, what's the appropriate outlet, what's the best outlet and audience for different messages we want to get across on different occasions. But if we don't have anything to say, then why are we saying it? Why are you writing reports if we don't have anything to say?
So maybe the next step, sort of with these two reviews in general, would be to independently think about who is the audiences, who are the audiences that we want to reach with this. And once we identify those audiences, we can begin to think about what's the most appropriate avenue to reach them. And we've talked about a lot of those already this afternoon. Joe, do you got another comment or?
Sorry, no, I lower my hand.
Okay, Diane.
Well, in the context of the water supply reliability report, it could be there's a way to present that in the context of the San Francisco Bay Delta system as model or relevant to other water supply reliability, complex water supply, well, tripping over my words, that, that might warrant being in a more national outlet that could also serve to raise awareness within California. Do you see what I'm saying?
As a group of people who is probably addicted to writing journal papers, otherwise you're not here, you won't be here. We should probably give some thought as to normal publication outlets as well as novel publication outlets, novel to us, but would be more regular to the policy audiences that are relevant for our work.
Yeah, Bob.
Well, I've been quietly listening to all of these great ideas for the last 30 or 40 minutes. And I mean, they are all, I think truly, excellent ideas. What kept coming into my mind though was, okay, we've got these ideas, we've articulated them. What's the next step? What do we do? Do we put this on the agenda for April, or do we have an evening meeting? I think, as you suggested, with drinks and really out. But when and how do we develop a strategy for actually implementing some of these ideas, or which one should we do first, or which one should we drop for now? So what's the next steps?
Yeah, I think there's, let me throw one idea out. One is the overall communication strategy we've been talking about, response to Lauren Hastings. The next step is, I think, Lisa and I and Jay, we're going to put together some bulleted ideas about how we might do that in a general sense for April discussion. But perhaps with these two reviews, it might be useful for, again, the writing teams to get together and come up with a list of the target audiences and suggestions about how we might reach them. And they could do that in a small group meeting. We do have in April, the thought was the afternoon, late afternoon of the 6th, we would have a small group meetings. And that would be a good topic of discussion for those small groups to sit and brainstorm. Whether or not they drink is up to them, but and come up with these kind of ideas specific to those reviews, and then we could meet as a larger group to discuss them, put it on the agenda. And there may be some of these that are obviously already done, like presentation to the council. There may be others that are that we can merge so that both reviews have the same sort of a path forward, and then others might be more specific. I mean, that's one way forward.
Well, I think what you say is very important and right on target, is that we start out with some very specific activities, and we've got 2 reports in hand. And we use the next number of weeks or maybe a month or so, to really come up with targeted ideas on how we might move forward. And, I would say that gets us off the dime here and gets us going, and we can learn as we go. So anyway, good thoughts, Steve.
Yeah, and most communication strategists tell you the first step is to identify the audience. And and in our case, we're dealing with audiences, and maybe we can use Karen to help us zero in on more specifics on some of these. We need state agencies; they can help identify those. Tanya.
I think also too is that one of the stakeholder groups that was overlooked or that we can use these for is to bring in the NGOs better, really as one of our audiences, to really think about how we target them better and bring them, into our discussions in a more productive way. So anyway, we got lots of options here, but starting with these 2 reports, I think, is really the way we should go.
Great. Tanya?
Yeah, I think these are all great ideas. Just on the kind of broader communication strategy, I think it would be helpful to have council staff there who work on communications to engage with us and brainstorm with us a little bit. I think if the ISB leadership can come up with some kind of straw man type ideas to start bouncing around, it might be useful just to have that staff input. So.
Great idea. So
Might be useful for us to put together a 1-page document of communications outlets and options that we should think about every time we do a review. Just sort of a checklist for things to consider, so we don't reinvent the wheel every time.
And hopefully that's just something the 3 of us can get a start on, and then also they'll connect with the program's communications.
And we can have some of our excellent new staff help us with this.
Yep. Of course, if they're listening carefully, they'll realize that everything we intend to do, we'd first send off to them to get a start on. So
the royal we.
Okay, any other discussion on this topic? I think we've made a lot of progress, a lot of good ideas. Okay, thanks. Edmund, any public comment on this?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to mute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation before providing your public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just want to emphasize that with the rapid and accelerating climate change that we're seeing, that the kind of communication you're talking about by scientists with Delta stakeholders is actually critically important. And I'm actually stunned because I talk with and work with a huge range of different stakeholder groups, how much some of the stakeholder groups don't understand about the science. And so I would think when you produce a report, and in our comments, we did recommend that the water supply reliability report have, you know, a general public accessible preface, you know, what bits you could convey that would be helpful for the public to understand, because we're absolutely, there are so many effects of climate change that we're just not grappling with as a society. And I did want to say the Delta Stewardship Council has an excellent and well-funded communications program, and they are a constant presence on Science Twitter, and I regularly reshare selected tweets. And when there's appropriate videos, I'll reshare those as well. But one of our views, when I looked structurally at the funding, the budget for the science program and for the ISB, is it became clear that comm support, if there's going to be support for science communication, it has to come through the Stewardship Council budget, because that's the way it's being appropriated. And I really think there should be discussions. I think Diane's comments are excellent. You know, you should be doing press releases. You should be you are regularly getting some of the presentations in Maven, but I think Maven's notebook is also incredibly important for the wonkier audience. But this is absolutely something the Science Board needs. And this is a unique and really important board. And I think it's actually has an incredibly important role to play in adaptation to climate change in the Delta, which is basically like the New Orleans of the West Coast. And, you know, is it on the front line for risks from sea level rise and increased river flooding, as well as from droughts. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the more I think about this, the more you know, valuable it seems to me to come up with a bona fide communications strategy and make sure we loop in the communications folks at the council to largely help us implement it. And okay, well, that takes us to the last item, which is public comments for matters not on the agenda, but within the subject matter jurisdiction of the DISB. Any comments there, Edmund?
Yeah, we also have one from Deirdre. Deirdre, you have the ability to mute your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation before providing your public comment. Thank you.
Is my microphone unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I hadn't had a chance to report this, but there was a discussion at the last Delta Stewardship Council meeting about the DPIC restoration subcommittee. And I commented that there was some interest by members of the Delta Independent Science Board in that committee, and that I thought that there was amazing expertise on the board and it could be very useful. And Daniel Zingale asked Amanda Bowl, well, what about them participating? And Amanda said, oh yeah, there's some real interest there. So I've been meaning to copy that off the transcription and get it to you, and so you can follow up. But I think this relates to what you said before about, can the Delta ISB engage more with DPIC? And I think this restoration subcommittee might be one of those venues. And I'm just saying, I hope I didn't speak out of turn, but knowing that the ISB is not at the Stewardship Council meetings, I just wanted to convey the information that was presented in ISB meetings to the Stewardship Council. And I actually would like you to have more direct interaction with the Stewardship Council so that those requests can be conveyed more directly. But the council members hadn't heard about this.
Thanks. Has anyone been contacted as far as the restoration subcommittee? I think somebody reported to us at one of our previous meetings that thing was about to start and we wanted to be kept abreast of it, but I don't know that we've heard any more or if there's been a meeting. Edmund, do you know anything?
We sent out the meeting notice to the board members as part of our previous meeting package, and that everyone is welcome to attend those.
Okay. One of the things that, and I almost hate to bring this up, but one of the things that historically the board has done is had a representative at the council meeting, and just to sit in and listen and be a member of the public in that sense. We haven't, of course, done that since what happened last year, and haven't assigned anybody to do that. Now we're all welcome to watch the council meeting, look at the agendas, and Tom is laughing, so I'm sure he watches the council meetings religiously because they're on tape. But anyway,
I was watching Diane fade away.
The lights went out. I have to stand up. Okay. I'm in my lab because it's too cold. There's a blizzard. I'm going to leave in a minute. Sorry.
Well, I know I do look at the agenda items, but I think that's something we might want to pay a little bit more attention to. I know we will during April, May, and June because we'll be part of the agenda. So I know one of us will be there at least for, not in March, but for the next 3 meetings following that. But after that, we might want to think of our, I don't want to say participation, but at least attendance at the council meetings down the road. Okay, well, I don't see anything else on the agenda, so we're an hour ahead almost, so we're planning to recess today, and then we reconvene at 9 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow with item number 8 on the agenda. So thanks, everyone, and great discussions today, and have a good night.